Over the last couple of days, Israel has unleashed a brutal military campaign against Palestinians in Gaza, as well as Palestinians in other occupied territories. This is some of the worst violence we've seen from Israel since 2014, at least, maybe even longer than that, because of just the dramatic scale and the escalation that's been going on. But there are many different parts to this. You have the airstrikes where Israel is launching airstrikes with fighter jets into Gaza at civilian infrastructure. I've seen them bomb apartment buildings and other civilian infrastructure in Gaza. There you have the land grabs that have been ramped up, and they've been going on. I mean, the land grabs from Israel of Palestinian territories have been going on unabated for decades, but over the last few months, they've ramped it up, and especially over the last few weeks and last few days. That's a whole other part of the equation. And then aside from the IDF and the escalations from the Israeli government, you have I don't know how else to describe it, but just mobs of angry Israeli Zionists who are in the streets chanting "Death to all Arabs" and committing violence against Palestinian citizens and burning down and attacking mosques all over Israel and other holy sites. So, like I said, this is just the latest chapter in the brutal occupation of the Palestinian people. And over the last few days, this violence has led to the deaths of over 100 Palestinians, and about a quarter of them, so maybe 25 to 30 of these civilian casualties have been children. And there's so much to break down about the last few days of extreme violence and on purpose targeting of civilians. Of course, that it's been funded with the U.S. and the weapons coming from the U.S. You have U.S. politicians going out there doing apologetics while Israel is doing a genocide in real time. Leaders in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party all coming out to the defense of Israel, and the same bullshit line, Israel has a right to defend themselves. And I'll get into all of that, but right now, as we speak, the situation has escalated even more dramatically in the last few hours. Israel has continued with the airstrike, the air campaign that they've been unleashing on Gaza, but they dramatically escalated it. And this is part of basically an invasion of Gaza that's happening right now. The IDF and the Israeli government has, over the last few days, been threatening to make Gaza burn and threatening to invade Gaza and threatening an all-out war. So they've followed through on that today. They have ground troops invading invading Gaza. And you also have the dramatic increase in the airstrikes. The extent isn't clear yet because this, like I said, this is all happening in real time. But from what I've the information that I've been able to find online, it's from when the campaign started. In the first 10 minutes, there were anywhere between 100 and 200 airstrikes in 10 minutes. So, and mind you, keep in mind, this is important context. Israel has the most advanced military equipment and gear that you can possibly have and weaponry, all coming, like I said, from the U.S. and the U.S. military. They have the backing of the U.S., the largest military, most powerful military in the history of the world, and all of our allies. And they're going up against Palestinians in Gaza who don't even have an army. They don't even have an army. They don't have an air force. They don't have a navy. And this is, like I said, it's incredibly important context because from the media, the corporate media, mainstream media in the U.S., from the all the politicians, they will like to describe this as like a both sides thing. And we need peace on both sides. We need an end to the violence on both sides. But like I said, that's an incredibly disingenuous false equivalency, because on one hand, you have the occupiers, the powerful, unmatched military of Israel, going after people who cannot defend themselves in at that scale. So some of you may have heard the saying, shooting fish in a barrel. That's almost exactly what the Israeli government has been doing to Palestinians over the last few days and decades, really. Because Gaza is completely landlocked. The same with, well, the West Bank isn't technically landlocked. There is a port there, but Israel has complete control over the port and the waters too. So basically, they are cut off from the rest of the world, both Gaza and the West Bank. And because of that, it's impossible for them to have any type of functioning economy or sustainable country. They can't do trade on their own. They can't import necessary goods and medicines and foods and things like that. Inside the territory, it's the conditions are so horrible. I really don't even know how to put it into words. So from back in the last armed conflict in 2014, Israel bombed Gaza's last remaining power plant. So they don't even, in this area where 2 million people live, they don't even have electricity for most of the day. The last I heard, with generators and things like that, they have electricity for maybe 3 hours a day. And this is in the middle of the desert. And so they have no food storage. And they have no AC. They have no clean drinking water in Gaza and the West Bank because they don't have the electricity to treat the water. So these are the conditions that the people in Gaza are subjugated to. And again, it's basically an open air prison where Israel controls surrounds the entire territory and will not give the Palestinians there the right to free travel and to leave the territory as they please. So back to the fish in the barrel analogy, these people are imprisoned here in Gaza, and they don't have the military capability to actually fight back and push back against the incursions of Israel. So they're basically defenseless, and every single time there's escalation in violence, it's Israel that's the aggressor. Anytime there's some type of conflict like this, it's Israel that's the aggressor, whether it's through land grabs, throwing people out of their homes, or just launching airstrikes. So what we've seen over the last few days has been horrific, and I will go into more detail in separate videos. But it is going to get a whole lot worse because this invasion that Israel has launched today, and another piece of context that's important to have in this conversation. It's not like, oh, so Israel does these bombings and they decimate the civilian infrastructure. They kill a bunch of civilians, but these Palestinians, they'll just rebuild it or they'll get back on their feet. When they do these things, it's almost permanent because, like I said, they don't have electricity. They don't even have the basics. They don't have electricity. So if you're going around leveling civilian infrastructure, there's no way that they're going to rebuild it. So Israel is basically bombing them into the Stone Age, and everybody in the world is going to sit back idly and act like this is like some type of like a both sides thing. Like, it's both sides are equally responsible here. At every time, it's very clear who the aggressor is, who's in the wrong here, and that's Israel. Both in the broader context of this occupation that's been going on for decades, but also just in the recent events over the last few days. If Israel, the IDF, is going to go around and literally just round up hundreds of Palestinians and tell them that they need to leave their homes that their family has lived in for generations, and the people have lived ancestrally for hundreds of years, they need to just get up and move to the ghettos in Gaza or the West Bank so that Israeli settlers can demolish their homes and rebuild their own homes or businesses on top of it. So when that happens, the Hamas and anybody in Gaza is well within their rights to respond with violence because that's self-defense. People are forcibly removing you from... Imagine if somebody tried to do that shit here. Somebody just walked into your home with guns and telling you to get out or they're going to kill you. You have the right to respond in self-defense, and the same is true when it comes to international law and illegal occupation of a country or a people. They have a right to defend themselves. And it's not a both sides thing. Even if Hamas was firing rockets at IDF sites and IDF targets, they'd be well within their rights. Nobody could tell them that they're wrong because of the occupation that's been going on for decades. And then, of course, when you're bombing the civilian infrastructure, Palestinian civilian infrastructure, that's even more reason for them to respond with violent attacks against the IDF. And this isn't me saying... ever condoning attacking civilians. I don't agree with attacking civilians because they're supposed to be off limits. But if you're talking about the IDF, the Israeli military, yes, they're well within their rights to attack an illegal occupying force that's massacring their civilians on purpose and destroying their civilian infrastructure on purpose, which are all war crimes. So the Hamas and anybody else firing rockets into Israel, well within their rights to do so. And so over the conflict of the last few days, there's been about, like I said, there were over 100 Palestinian civilian casualties, and there were about 15 casualties on the Israeli side. So, as always, wildly disproportionate. And it's clear who has the military might on their side. So anybody who's out there trying to both sides this shit and say, oh, we need to end the violence on both sides, you can go somewhere with that bullshit, because like I said, there's one side illegally occupying the other side. So they already have the right to self-defense. And again, the people who are really the aggressors here are the occupiers, are the people with the fighter jets doing airstrikes. It's the people who are blocking in and blockading Palestinian territory. Those are the people. If you want peace, there can be no peace if they're the ones doing it. So all of these calls for peace on both sides rings incredibly hollow, because you can't have somebody occupying people and pretend like the violence is equally bad from both sides. That's ridiculous. Don't tell me, oh, if Palestinians stop firing rockets, then Hamas needs to stop firing rockets. And if Hamas doesn't, then they're in the wrong and they're the aggressors. No, no, no. The only way that there will ever be peace between the Israeli and Palestinians is, honestly, I believe, if there's a one-state solution. This whole two-state solution thing, I used to believe that was a viable option, and I've had it. Somebody explained it to me in a way that made it impossible for me to view that as a viable solution. In no other context where you have a racist, oppressive, occupying government and the people, the indigenous people that they're occupying, in no other context does it make sense to say, all right, you guys did all those land grabs, you stole all their territory, you killed all their people and took over all of their holy sites and all those things. But so now what we're going to do is we'll let you keep everything that you took, and the open air ghetto that you've relegated the Palestinians to, or the indigenous people to, they'll keep that, and we'll just wash our hands of it. At no point does that ever make sense. If you're going to talk about giving people rights, they need to have full rights. And Palestinians won't ever, especially in Gaza, the way that it's landlocked within Israel, they will never have full autonomy. They will never have full control of their borders if Israel is surrounding them and blockading them the way that they have been for decades. So the only peaceful solution, the only way that there can be peace on both sides, is if Israel, if there's a one-state solution and Palestinians have equal rights to Israelis. And if that's the case, when that's the case, Palestinians will have the numbers they will outnumber Israelis, the Jewish Israeli citizens. And that means if it's an actual democracy and there's equal representation, then they will have a say in government, very large say in government, and if not control of government. And only then, when when you diminish the power of the far right extremists in the Israeli government by giving Palestinians equal, if not more, say in the direction of the country, that is the only way that there's going to be peace in the situation. So I prefer there not be the violence. I'm not one of those people who just at any turn just go and pick up a gun and start a revolution. Because once the violence starts, as we've seen over the last few days and in the conflicts in the Middle East over decades, once the violence starts, you can't put that cat back in the bag, and it escalates, and the cost of it is the human toll. It's unbelievable. So for all the people in Gaza right now who are terrified, they know exactly what I'm talking about. To have in 10 minutes 200 or 100 airstrikes around you, and to see it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I'm looking at the videos, the home recordings that people have that they've been posting online. Bombs dropping all over their street and their neighborhood, and it's a terrifying experience. And I don't think enough people really grasp the reality of war. And if they did, there would be more outrage about shit like this, because this does not have to happen. This is entirely the fault of the Israeli government and their imperialism that they're conducting on behalf of the West. So this is a tragic story. There will be more updates to this, but it's been a wild couple days in Gaza and in Israel.